Hi, my name is Juliana Longhenry, and this is my video blog version of my aesthetics, music, and philosophy first assignment. So I wanted to talk about the prompt about the social usefulness of music because I'm a sociologist. So the specific prompt states, because music taste is inherently subjective, music should be evaluated according to its social usefulness. Well, we've got a lot to unpack there in just that one sentence. If we do want to evaluate music, though, in a way that will make everyone the most happy, or, evaluate music in a less subjective manner, we have to evaluate it according to its social usefulness. Well, even then, there's still going to be subjectiveness, and no one's going to be perfectly happy with how we've evaluated music. But it's human nature to never be fully happy with how we have evaluated something as broad as music, something as personal and almost undefinable about it. So the social usefulness of music then is important for this. I want to talk about how music taste is inherently subjective. This feels like the first fact we need to, fact check. So since September of 2022, I have been the host of a weekly radio show at my home college. I started this radio show to show off my friends', let's say, eclectic music tastes, as a kind word. I have friends from varying backgrounds, and they all have unique tastes. One friend has songs that remind him of animated media or just from animated media, which tend to be very upbeat and optimistic. That whole friendship is magic sort of message. I have a friend whose song and music taste comes a lot from what their father played, who was a very British man, so into a lot of the Smiths, newer stuff like Los Campesinos. I have a friend who listens to a lot of folk music that has a more calmer tendency, but has more depressing messages behind them. I have a friend whose whole thing is Midwestern emo, and if you have not heard of that, just look up the Twin Mattresses. They're a great example of some Midwest emo, along with some dad rock like Red Hot Chili Peppers and Nirvana. He and I get along very well. These sorts of music talk about depressing topics, but have an overall tone of anger to them. On this radio show, we would explore all of those themes, and I would talk about this with my friends and get into, how they came to have this music taste. My favorite parts were when we would have collaborative episodes, when 4 people would combine their music tastes to find what was common amongst 4 people. And what I found was a lot of video games, musicals, and whatever our friends would listen to would become what we listened to. Because listening to music is inherently a personal thing, a relational thing, and I think it's beautiful. With all this nonsense out of the way, what do we define as music? There have been so many debates to figure out what we define as music. Anything from sound to organization of noise could be a definition of music. One of the descriptive definitions of music that I found are: music is sounds intentionally produced or organized to have at least one basic musical feature, such as pitch or rhythm. And this comes from Gracyk and Kania on page 8 of their article, which I will have linked in the description. This definition helps. As a society, we also have collective assumptions about what makes music. So music can depend on one's culture, one's religion, whatever's popular in the media at the time, whatever genre is popular to your region, and just general musical experiences. I know I myself have a wide variety of musical experience based on the many places I have lived and the many people I have come across. I'm very comfortable with Christian church music that tends to be choral. A lot of people don't tend to vibe with choral music because they find it to be boring. I'm not of that opinion, but that is neither here nor there. Which gets me into part 3, how and why we evaluate music. Historically, evaluating music has been based on one's taste in music or one's criticism of music. Again, this is from Gracyk and Kania. And I find this to be a little troubling because it's an either-or situation. I feel that to be the most evaluative, you can add aspects of taste and criticism into what we evaluate as good or bad music, if such a term even exists. A quote I found from one of our class readings was that the development of music itself has influenced philosophical thinking and vice versa. So when approaching a philosophical question such as this, it's important to remember that philosophy in and of itself has been affected by music. So it's important to be aware of the limitations we have in answering this question of the social usefulness of music and inherent subjectiveness of taste. As a class, we discussed one of the difficulties of evaluating music, and there was a specific example that particularly irked one of my friends, which I found interesting. The example was how John Williams' Star Wars soundtrack was not as culturally significant as Richard Wagner's Der Ring des Nibelungen. I'm sure I butchered that. And I was of the argument that that was a fair point, because Richard Wagner's Der Ring des Nibelungen has been around for 150 years and is an iconic piece of media, and the songs in it have outlasted almost the story itself. Those are what are more iconic. Whereas with the Star Wars, the music is an important aspect, but I would argue that it's not the most important aspect of the films. So the music soundtrack might not be as iconic. But this is a hot topic debate that my friends personally had for 10 minutes while I was writing this script. When we're evaluating music, it's really easy to say, oh, this is alternative and this is rock. We can't compare these two because they're not in the same field. But I would like to bring up what my very wise younger brother once said, which is that he believes as long as something exists, it can be compared to something else. It doesn't have to fall under the same tree, under the same vineyard, under the same continent for it to be able to be compared to it. With all this jargon in mind, what do I even define as social usefulness? Catherine Kroller's Social Usefulness as a Criterion for Research article argues that social usefulness is an integral aspect of research overall. And as a sociologist, I'm obviously inclined to agree. And social usefulness is important to understand what a society overall values. If we want to define music in an evaluative way, we should know what the society values in their own particular way. Going back to Bowie, they say that something can be useful for existing while not having to explain itself. Quote, music's meaning might lie precisely in the fact that we cannot say in words what it means. Why does music exist at all if what it says could be said just as well in other ways? And this is on page 3. And I found this quote to be strikingly significant. I find it is very hard to explain in words why a piece of music hits me so well. And again, I'm a radio show host. For a year and a half, my whole thing has been to describe music and its impact on people, and I still struggle to do it. Sometimes I'll have a friend come in and they'll say, you know, this music just hits in just the right way, and I don't know why. And then we try to dissect that together, and it's still difficult. If we want to get specific, here are ways that music can help. Jill's study outlines 5 ways music can improve physical health and mental health in her article, 5 ways music can make you healthier. Number 1, it reduces stress and anxiety. This feels fairly straightforward. Whenever people are stressed, they tend to turn to music. Makes sense. Number 2, it can decrease pain, which is most likely based on its ability to affect dopamine releases. If you have more dopamine going, you're not going to feel as much pain. In this article, it talks about how people going through the hospital will often listen to music, and it'll make their process of dealing with surgeries or operations a lot nicer. Number 3, it can improve immune functioning, though this is still being researched. Again, it goes back to that concept of lowering stress levels, which works by increased dopamine release. So, music really hits that sweet spot in the brain. Number 4, it can aid memory. And this has been one that's researched a lot more recently, I believe, especially within patients who have dementia. To quote from the article, music enjoyment elicits dopamine release, and dopamine release has been tied to motivation, which in turn is implicated in learning and memory. Seems straightforward enough. And number 5, music helps us exercise based on, the music tempo you have and oxygen intake levels. And I have my own personal example of this. I cannot work out if I don't have music going. I need that external stimuli to focus on so that I don't focus on how bad my body feels, but I can listen to the hard metal tunes I've got going on instead. And as I mentioned earlier, music can bring people together. Music has a really great way of making people form communities and whatnot. My dad personally told me an example when he got to see his favorite band, and everyone just knew the lyrics, and it felt like, he said, almost a spiritual experience. We obviously find that music has social usefulness, but I wanted to consider an interesting other perspective. What if you don't enjoy music? Do you get social usefulness out of it? Not really. There's an article on musical anhedonia from Duncan that I have listed in my YouTube description. And it talks about how there's just a part of the brain that works differently with people with this condition, where they just react to music as neutral. It's just sounds. And to me, that's very interesting. As someone who's taking music classes, very obviously interested in music. These people, though, do understand the societal importance of music, and this is just a subsect of the population. Obviously, as on the larger whole, music has social usefulness. And because of that, that's how we can judge it. In conclusion, after this long, mostly scripted rant, if we wish to evaluate music in any way, shape, or form, in ways that will offend people the least, we ought to talk about how they're useful within society. If I say, I really love Florence and the Machine as an artist, and I think, personally, that she's better than, say, Dua Lipa, I would have to back that up with how I find Florence and the Machine to be more socially useful for myself than Dua Lipa. Personally, I find Florence and the Machine's wide range of music to be much more in tune with my own emotions and my day-to-day life than Dua Lipa. But someone else who lives a different life might find Dua Lipa's energy to be much more in tune with what they need. So once again, music is inherently subjective based on taste, but it's easiest to evaluate it personally based on its social usefulness. Thank you so much.